When we talked last week, each and every one of you talked to me about how important it is to you and how it is an undercurrent in the work that you do to ensure that all of your students are achieving and doing great things and have the ability to succeed regardless of their background. And we talked a little bit about how focused sometimes those results are on test scores. So my question for you is how you measure and track student achievement and what you value outside of test scores, especially knowing all that we know now coming out of the pandemic. And I think we'll start with you, PJ. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's a myriad of ways of which we can always measure student success. In our district, we focused on 4, and I think that those 4 can transcend beyond just what we do in a district in Illinois, and I think that they can apply to what matters nationally. So we focus pretty sincerely on a version of test scores, not perhaps a high-stakes assessment, but we are very concerned with where our students are at in terms of reading at the end of 3rd grade. The research is abundant that if we intervene early and invest, that we can help kids and give them the best chance at future success in school if we can get them on to reading at grade level by 3rd grade. The same holds true for 5th grade math. So we put an inordinate amount of expense, resources, and influence into ensuring that takes place within our district. And I'm very pleased to say that we are currently, as a result of that, showing no evidence of learning loss. So the narrative of learning loss and what's taking place throughout the country as a result of those efforts, I think we've mitigated those. But I think that additionally, there's 2 other areas that aren't necessarily tracked as fervently that are very important to us in terms of kind of defining what success looks like. And the first for us is we have discovered, and this has been supported again through research, is that if a student is on track to graduate by the end of 9th grade, that their chance of success is significantly higher. So again, we have a disproportionate amount of resources we provide to try to ensure that kids are leaving the 9th grade prepared to graduate, and not only prepared to graduate, but particularly having success in the core areas. And if they're not, we provide a great deal of intervention. This has led us to have very successful graduation rates and to prepare our kids for what their tomorrow is. The one thing I think which differentiates us beyond what the typical test scores are is trying to figure out exactly how we prepare kids for their tomorrow, what ready means for them. One of the things that we have worked really hard is to remove gatekeeper policies and to ensure that all kids have access to rigorous courses. So I'm exceptionally proud that in a small rural district without many partners, we have 85% of our kids leave with some level of college credit, and over a third of our kids leave with over a semester of college credit. More importantly to us is that this is not just your typical academic focus, your AP drive. We're in a small town rural community. A large percentage of those collegiate credits are earned in things such as agriculture, in preparing kids for what their tomorrow is, instead of just assuming that a college for all mentality is going to work in every scenario.
All right, Matt, go ahead. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. It's a delight to be here at the National Press Club, and I would second quite a few of things that PJ brought forward. Our school board last year adopted a new strategic plan that not only includes the things that you typically think of, vision, strategic commitments, but they also committed to 11 benchmarks, 7 of which are shared throughout our community through a project called Northfield Promise. We're in Northfield, Minnesota, just south of the Twin Cities, so it's a collective impact project. So we are working to have all of our community resources, to use another Minnesota reference, row the boat in the same direction so that we are not having overlaps, that we are leveraging each other's skills. So I'll just tap a couple of things that PJ didn't say. One of the first things that we are looking at is making sure that we have a connection with every child as soon as we know that they are here. So on a monthly basis, I write a handwritten card to every newborn in our district because one of our first benchmark is every child ready for kindergarten. We opened an early childhood center in 2018 or 2019, where we now have all of our services under one roof. And so things like early childhood family education, early childhood special education, our licensed childcare, our preschool, all of these things are operating under the same roof. Some of our parents before were actually having to have 3 different childcare locations to serve their children's needs before they got into our K-12 system. And so we do a lot of work at early childhood to intervene early, and then we do measure. We do embrace data. Data can tell us quite a bit of things. It's partnering that statistical work with the human being in front of you. So our 100% of the children who have attended our preschool, or excuse me, our child care center were deemed ready for kindergarten. So that ready for K is also the most diverse in our community. So that's how we're measuring. We've gone through the rigorous process to make sure we can provide scholarships for those students. We think that when we are able to try to eliminate that gap before students get into our K-12 system, that's a great way to measure it. Third grade reading, all the things that PJ said, but we also are looking at connectedness to the community and having a plan for what you do when you graduate high school. We look for domino pieces of data. What's a piece of data that can tell us something about our students that we can then extrapolate from? And sometimes we make things far more complicated than it needs to be. Something we've been looking at deeply coming out of the pandemic is attendance. If you're there, right, we have a chance to engage you. If you're not, we don't. And so doing deep dives into attendance as a piece of data about if we're being successful, you want to come to school. And if you're not, we have to figure out what are the interventions we need to provide. So those are 2 pieces of data, ways that we're measuring success that I think are a little bit different than what PJ said, but still on the same alignment. My colleague from New York.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Caitlynn, for facilitating this. My big question is, if you have one mic between you, do you both drop the mic at the same time, or do you do that one after the other? So I thought those were really excellent answers, and I would just piggyback on some of those ideas. We have a very similar approach to tackling this that you do. We pay attention to high-stakes testing, of course. Everybody needs to do that. But we really are thinking about those predictive indicators early on. And if Barnes & Nobles, if Amazon, if other companies know exactly what I want to order, when I want to order, when I want my order refilled, we should be smart enough to figure out what the pieces of data are early on that tell us whether or not children will be successful. So similar to my colleagues, we are looking at early indicators of success. Third grade reading especially is another indicator for us as well. And then the coursework along the way that kids are struggling with that tell us if they don't pass that course, they likely will not be successful as they continue on their high school journey. So algebra is one for us in New York State that is a very quick indicator of whether or not a child will struggle. And then we're using those data elements to drive programming that's specific to the needs of every individual child every year and adapting those programs, developing new programs then to meet those needs and shifting them every year. So we don't stick with the same solution over and over and over again. Family engagement is one of the indicators we look at as well. Student engagement, absenteeism, similar concept to you. We recognize, yes, if you're not there, that you will have difficulty learning. But we ask the second question is, if you're not there, why aren't you there? And what do we need to do to get you there, or to make additional accommodations and find a way to be flexible with students to provide the right program for them? There are reasons why they aren't there. It's not just kids deciding that they don't want to be there. They'd actually prefer to be a part of the community. So how do we make sure we're inclusive in that thinking as well? We think a lot about mental health indicators also and collect data that way, both qualitatively and quantitatively, and measure that data and regularly keep tabs on how our children are doing outside of just their academic work, and understand where they are from a mental health perspective and how we can better meet their needs and help them be successful. So all along the board, looking at how we engage families and whether or not they are there and they are coming, and then asking the question, what do we do with that information? How are we engaging children? What are their mental health needs? What are the supports we can put around them? And again, those academic indicators beyond high stakes testing. We do MAP testing at a very young age for children, and the formative assessments that are happening in classrooms. We've also looked at course failure data by the quarter, and have a pretty rigorous system at the middle and high school level for case study teams, building study teams to look at individuals that are struggling. And as soon as they begin to show any sign of struggle, really swooping in with teams of people to help them at the very individual level, adapt their program and provide them that assistance. So it does go way beyond, but the way that we've closed the gap for kids and then been very specific about looking at different groups of kids in our district. So high achievement overall is not really great success for a district. It is, do you have high achievement for every child in your district? That's the true measure of success. So the data has to also be broken down by subgroups so we understand when our groups who are underrepresented are not successful, what we need to do very specifically for every individual group. Thank you.
In Douglas County, we believe that high stakes are for adults. They are not an indicator on how our students perform. Students are very bright. They're smart, they're intelligent, they're competent. And so the high stakes gives us an indication as to how well we prepared over the summer, the quality of the instruction that's being delivered. It gives us an indication of our processes, our protocols, and our procedures. And we use them for that. How can we do a better job of making sure that all of the talents that are coming into our district, that they reach their potential? And in education, we are data rich. And so we can monitor attendance as we do. We can monitor behavior as we do. We can monitor how you perform on summative assessments, on formative assessments. So data has never been an issue for us in our profession. What we're working on is making sure that our parents understand that the performance of their child, that we share that with our processes, protocols, and procedures. John Hopkins did a study, and the study was very valid. Here's what we know to be factual. If a student graduates from high school having had 4 core classes in 9th grade, 10th, 11th, and 12th, had a high attendance of 90% or better, and had a B average, that they can get into any 4-year college and graduate at an 80% rate. And so what that tells us is if kids are taught to work hard, they have strong attendance, and they have the core curricula, they can be successful. It didn't say anything about high-stakes assessment. So high-stakes assessment, they're important because they give us feedback on what we're doing, not with students. The problem is, I think sometimes we overstress our students because we see them as the ones that are not getting it correctly. So in Douglas County, we're trying to change the conversation. And we want to support students, and we want them to be successful. And I'm not talking about lowering expectations. Supporting doesn't mean you reduce the bar. Supporting means that you scaffold so that they can be successful. So we value high stakes, and we look forward to, administering it every year. But we don't want to become countries where they take off 2 weeks because high stakes tests are so important. We are who we are because of our entrepreneurial spirits, because of our ability to create things that have yet to be created. And if we focus on high stakes, we're going to deviate from that which makes us the great country that we are. So in Douglas County, that's not who we are. That's not what we do. We focus on our students because we know that when they compete for scholarships, when they compete for jobs, they're competing globally. And we want to win. And so because we want them to win, high stakes is a portion of what we look at, but it doesn't define who we are, doesn't define what we do, and it will not limit where our kids are going. That's Douglas County.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. I know how excited, Trent, that you are to answer questions, so you're going to answer first on the next one. I spend a lot of time talking to superintendents in my job, covering specifically district leadership and management, so it makes sense, right? And one of the things that I hear a lot about recently is how difficult it will be when federal COVID relief funds are no longer, which is coming right up, right? So I guess I'm curious from your perspectives, knowing that it is difficult to make investments in things that take recurring funding, where your priorities are for that funding in the next year, and how you kind of plan to soften the blow of the loss when it is gone. So Trent, you're up.
Great question. So when we were notified as to how much funds we were going to receive, we were excited. I don't mind sharing, in Douglas County, we received approximately $50 million. So I have a philosophy with grant money. Never commit to anything that you can't sustain long term. And the goal is to use it as a part of your current program. And so what we did in Douglas County, we didn't do anything new. So we already had plans to add new heating and air conditioning units. And so in lieu of using the eSplash fund for that, or our funds, we use ARP money for that. One of the things we realized with COVID was I did something trying to be customer service focused with my parents, and I don't recommend it. For my parents, it was phenomenal. But for me, I had 10,000 parents on a Zoom call trying to decide how we're going to navigate COVID. And, you know, everyone had an idea, and no one wanted their kids to go, and some wanted their kids to go, and they wanted their kids to be able to go to school, and they wanted their same teacher. And it was probably one of the most rewarding Zoom calls that I had. And so we decided that we were going to give our parents a choice. So half of the class would be at home, and half would attend school. And so I had a teacher, and I felt so bad as a superintendent because they were having to provide instruction to kids at home and kids at school. And they were trying to pay attention to nonverbals at home and nonverbals at school. And that was very traumatic for my teachers. And in addition to that, we didn't necessarily have the technology to offer that. And so we were buying camcorders and trying to put them up and plug them into the internet to do both, and it just didn't work. So we took our ARPA funds and we purchased interactive boards and put them in all of our elementary schools and all of our middle schools. And so we turned our classrooms into what I would call virtual spaces. And so if we have to teach from at home again, imagine being in a corporate conference room and you can Zoom in and have conference call both ways. Well, now every elementary school in Douglas County and every middle school in Douglas County is set up as a conference room. And so we're taking our funds and using it what we'd already budgeted for. And so we didn't want to do anything new because if we did, it was going to be difficult to sustain it. And so from day one, we were appreciative. We hired some class size reduction staffers so that we could spread classrooms out so that COVID wouldn't be easily spreadable. But we tried to be smart. But that's what we do. As CEOs, our job is to make sure that the staff have the best resources and materials. Our job is to make sure that on the 15th and the 30th that checks are cleared and that safety is occurring. And so if we overcommit because of the grants, it's going to put us in a precarious predicament. And so in Douglas County, we just chose to be smart. We didn't do anything new. We followed our traditional plans.
Thanks, Trent. Great job. So I completely agree with my colleague, Trent from Georgia, that the idea of not overcommitting was very important to us. So we looked at the funding as venture capital and, frankly, an opportunity to innovate, to try new programs that in the standard budget year become very challenging without in that year eliminating programming that has been in place for a long time, staffing that has been in place for a long time, programs that people have depended on, cherished. Moving organizations and innovating is tricky for many reasons we know around change research, but particularly in that moment when we're dealing with people. And for many years in our state, we've dealt with inequitable funding and an inability at times to continue to have that innovative spirit. We focused on two particular areas without overcommitting to the future. Again, I think that's a very, very good point. And that was mental health support and instructional support. So in thinking for us about coming out of the pandemic at that point, the two greatest needs that were presenting themselves, as I think is the case in many districts, mental health support for children and families and instructional support for staff as we consider learning loss, so to speak, from that period of time. So targeting those resources to places that would hopefully be temporary, so you can improve some of those outcomes in that time, but allowed us to innovate in terms of developing new programs that could then be budgeted for over several years in our ongoing budget, so that when that money is no longer there, we have the money now in place to continue to support those programs, because we've either used those to be able to eliminate programs that maybe have run their course over time, or we've been able, again, to establish those positions in an ongoing fundable way through our state or local property tax. The mental health supports have focused on bringing in outside providers. Finding providers in our area and frankly in our country right now is a huge challenge. We've tried to provide additional training too to support people doing mental health work all around us, not just the providers and counselors that are trained to do that, but providing additional training for people in classrooms, for administrators, for other folks. It can't supplant the mental health support that is provided by those that are highly trained, but it can support that. And so looking at additional programs, we've contracted with local children's hospital to come in actually and provide that support in district as well to eliminate the barriers. We recognize that many members of our community, one of the barriers to receiving mental health support was not just finding a provider, but getting to the provider and all of the intricacies of that and access. So we now have that right in our school. That program is supported by that money, and then it will eventually be supported also by our general fund. And again, in the instructional support area, we've hired instructional support specialists and created instructional leadership positions to support professional development and very specific targeted work to support teachers in developing their skills and remediating things that were lost during that period of time that either will not be as necessary as we approach the end of those funds, or, again, we've budgeted for those positions so that we can maintain them. And they will take the place of some of the more traditional programs that had been in place, which will no longer be needed. So I think my colleague brings up a great point about sustainability over a period of time, an important consideration for us all to make. We've tried to target those to the two greatest areas of student need in every one of our decisions along the way with the funding. Thank you.
So I hope that what you've heard from my two colleagues is the very thoughtful nature that these federal funds and how they were used in their school districts. And I'm sure all of you have heard from time to time some anecdotal analysis of that schools, wasted their COVID funds or they just used them for whatever. And we just need to dispel that myth. In our state, we had to have approval before we received any reimbursement for any of these federal funds. So there's a narrative that has gone around about how schools have maybe not used these funds in the way that they were intended, and we just need to be right up front and say, no, that is wrong. It is not true. Listen to these two colleagues from very different sized school districts and the thoughtful nature that they have used these one-time funds. I second what they have said about sustainability, thinking forward to the future. In Northfield Public Schools, we really looked, I would say there are three different ways that we looked at this. First of all, the response to the health crisis. We needed to do whatever we could to prioritize in-person instruction. So when we were thinking about how much cleaning we needed to do, there was a lot of custodial overtime in that. There were equipment in which we could disinfect spaces quickly. So I would talk about the COVID response as one bucket. Again, highly regulated, what you could purchase, what you couldn't. But everything that we could do to keep in-person instruction happening to the best of our ability. The second area that I would say that we looked at were what were things that we had wanted to do for a while that we just didn't have the dollars to do, where we could experiment and say, are we getting our money's worth for that? And then if so, we will make the decisions to prioritize that moving forward. I'll give you an example. Along the mental health lines, we added an additional guidance counselor at our secondary buildings. This was a really important piece for us. And our budget prioritization committee last year said that was one of the top priorities to keep going. So that's something that in a regular budget year may have been difficult for us to do, but we are able to do that, and the return on that investment is substantial. We also invested in a program that had been replicating a program that had been very successful. So we had a highly successful community school program at one of our 3 elementary schools. It had been in place for 9 years. We're using some of the after-school federal relief dollars to expand that to our other 2 schools, and by being able to seed it to begin with, we anticipate we're going to be able to make that ongoing. Again, something that we can sustain. And finally, every superintendent up here and in the room knows that people have been paying attention to inflation for probably, the last 8-9 months? As school superintendents, we've been paying attention to inflation for decades because we rarely get an inflationary increase from our state legislators. So we are also using a portion of our federal relief funds to be able to have budget stabilization. We are in declining enrollment in our school district, and our goal would be to have a soft landing, if you will, to whatever our new normal is in the number of students that we're going to have. So thinking about how did we respond to the crisis, how could we do some experimentation, then continue on things that were successful. There were things that we tried that were great ideas but weren't successful. We're not funding those anymore. And then that third part of budget stabilization.
So I hope to not say the same thing in the 4th different way, but I think we're pretty similar in the approach that was taken. For us, it was, I think scale matters, and I think that was the initial point that was made. So for us in a small district, we received far fewer dollars than some larger districts did. So that meant that the opportunities we had for large building improvements, HVAC upgrades, et cetera, were relatively minimal just because we were not afforded that much money. But I think the first thing everyone did with ESSER dollars was figure out how do we get kids back in school safely. And so once we were able to do that, and we had expended that amount of dollars, for us, in Illinois they use a formula that says if you spend this amount of money on a kid, they should be able to meet standard. When I arrived in my district, we were in the 60th percentile, between 60 and 70%. So our ability to innovate creatively is limited. So what we do is, and it's not different than many other districts, but we use a zero-based budgeting process, which means that every year we justify every expense to ourselves in whether we're going to continue to move forward or not. This did give us the opportunity, with sustainability in mind, to look at expanding our programs, our services, and our supports, both in terms of our professional development for our staff and for the services and supports that directly hit students in a way that we would have never been able to do without the influx of dollars. So as people talk about, again, whether we use it appropriately, this opened up opportunities for us in ways that we might not have ever been able to serve kids financially in a small rural district. Now, as a result, what happens is that we still have to go back through and figure out when these dollars are done, and for us they are, right? We've expended our dollars. Now we have to make sure and measure our return on investment very carefully. And as we look at this nationally, whether people spent with sustainability in mind or whether people spent full-heartedly, whichever way it happens to be, I think what is important now for superintendents and for education is that we take a deep look at what's our return on investment for the programs that we initiated. So similarly, we prioritized mental health and added services in those regards. We've had outstanding return on investment in that. So that means that when these dollars are gone, that we're going to have to make a choice between some other program that has historically been in our district, make a difficult choice, and that we're going to prioritize this now moving forward. So without the influx of dollars, we would have never had the opportunity to be innovative and creative for us. We're on the ground floor with multiple tech partners, this Customer Zero, and trying to figure out and pilot things for them to see if we can find partnerships that better support our kids, all while very acutely understanding that this money is not going to sustain and that at some point there's going to be a reduction of something. Instead of just sticking with what we've always done, we plan to innovate, and then we'll make the choices on the back end, and that's the way that we chose to invest the dollars, and it's been very successful for us in Meridian.
Okay, thank you guys. I was told a myth, maybe we're going to see, that it is impossible for superintendents to answer a question in 2 sentences or less. So we're going to try it. So this is a test. So my one rule for this test, you're going to answer this question in 2 sentences or less. And we're going to start with Matt, I think.
Good luck.
I
yes.
think he's gonna have the hardest time, but we'll see.
You know me well.
The question: what is one thing that you hope to accomplish in the next year as superintendent? And keep in mind also that you were all finalists for Superintendent of the Year, and whoever gives the best answer wins. No, I'm just kidding.
Can I buy a vowel? Just kidding. So I think in the next year, what I hope to accomplish is to continue the progress that we've had toward our elementary teachers really becoming deeply understanding of the science of reading.
In the next year, I hope and expect that all of our students from every subgroup will graduate together. I also hope that all children will have an opportunity to engage in rigorous coursework and be taken care of from a mental health perspective and with respect to their social emotional learning. And they will come away better. Those are run on.
There's
I don't know.
Well-placed comment.
14 clauses.
Well punctuated.
K-12 education is the cornerstone for America's success. Continue increasing the number of advocates for K-12.
I hope to continue the success we've had in Meridian by overseeing a smooth transition of board authority and to continue to focus on preparing kids for their tomorrow.
Okay, listen, some of you cut it pretty close, but I think we can say you all passed. All right, okay. All right, we're going to be serious again. So another thing that we all talked about that has been particularly difficult for a lot of superintendents actually across the country is when divisive political debates, whether that be about vaccines, masks, race, religion, or anything else that you could probably think of, right, come to your district. And we talked a little bit about how that's affected all of you. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective how big of an impact those debates and issues have on your school community, on the people that are in them, and how much time it takes away from other work to deal with them. I think, Kevin, we haven't started with you yet, so you're up.
Thanks, Caitlynn. I think that through this process, first of all, it has been incredible to learn from these colleagues and to be in this seat with people who are just incredible leaders in their states and in their districts. And we've had a couple of conversations about this through the course of the process and with Caitlynn last week when we had the opportunity to all get together. And it really is fascinating and frustrating and a bit disturbing to think about the state that our country is in relative to this incredible divide that we're engaged in. And we had some very thoughtful discussions about ways forward. We had some thoughtful discussions about the ways those have been handled in our districts. We had some thoughtful discussions about the ways that it is impacting kids. And it is. It's impacting kids. It's impacting adults in many different ways. First of all, the rancor, the political divide, has certainly impacted the candidates that we have entering teacher education programs, entering administrative programming, entering the superintendency. And it's a great concern for those of us involved also in developing the next generation of superintendents, but also looking at the teachers who are coming to us and the availability of staff members. So it's having that impact. It's having an impact on children more than anything perhaps, though, when their identity, their humanity, who they are, where they come from, what they believe in, and essentially who they are as a human being is being questioned by individuals. And they're watching. We had a conversation this morning in the session regarding people are watching. I think children are watching. They're watching our board meetings. Everything that we do as a school district is a learning opportunity for children, and they are observing this conversation happening that questions who they are as a human being. So I think that is the concern that we all have that is the greatest in terms of what lessons are they learning. Now, I hope what they're learning in the conversation is the courage of leaders, of school boards, of superintendents who are saying no to that conversation, that are respectfully listening to different perspectives and trying to find the space in the middle, but not a space that covers up, overlaps, or denies the humanity of an individual. And so the amount of time and energy that is being spent by leaders on that is significant. Staff members who are trying to innovate and do great work for children are spending a considerable amount of time balancing that work with concern over what political toes might be stepped on or what concerns are. So they are impacted. Certainly from a leadership perspective, we're impacted. The people coming into the field, it is an impact. But primarily I'm concerned about the impact on children and when those conversations happen, how we're managing those. And I would hope that through the courage of conversations and standing up for them, they're impacted in a very positive way. But I think that's what we need to be thinking most clearly about. Thank you.
I tried to use it as a motivator. I remember when I was in college and I was taking a international policy class, and Dr. Paul McGowan was teaching the class, and he talked about how Russia would set aside money to try to divide America based upon race, based upon any issue that it could, and they felt like they could be more successful by dividing us as a people than trying to defeat us in war. And COVID did to our country what Russia spent millions trying to do and have yet to be successful. So how was it? It was stressful. It kept us up at night. It created conflict inside and outside all across. But we can't complain because we're leaders. And so we had to put all of that aside because companies were depending upon us to create safe spaces for kids to continue their learning so that productivity could start again. And so what I would tell my staff is this has to motivate us because those individuals who don't understand, statistically, they were a public school graduate. Those who are missing something, they were one of our former students. So for me, it was a motivator to work even harder so that when the next crisis comes, the students that we have, they won't have the uneducated debates. They won't repeat history, because if you read all the articles of what happened during the last pandemic, I don't think we made much improvement from the last one to this one. And so as a superintendent who's tasked with the responsibility of making sure that our students are not focused on high test scores, but are educated and independent thinkers, it motivated me that I've got to go a little bit further. I need for all kids to be successful and eligible, because the problems that we're facing, they're more complex. And so in pre-algebra and basic math isn't going to be enough for students to be successful and to make their own decisions and to not watch something on television and believe it, knowing that it's false. So for me, the COVID showed a weakness, but I chose to reverse it and allow it to motivate me, to motivate my staff and teachers that we've got to get it right, because there will be another one. And shame on us if we don't prepare those who are going through it and equip them so they can be successful the next time we have a pandemic or not a pandemic.
You made eye contact, so you're up.
We've been good, so no, I'm just kidding. It's, so a couple avenues to go down in this question is, I've always seen my role as the leader of the district as somewhat of a blanket. And so if I can do my best to insulate my teachers and my students from some of the other things that might be taking place in the community, then I think I'm doing my job. So they can focus on the job is already difficult enough for our teachers and our principals. So the more that I can insulate them, the better. And I think I had done a pretty good job of that until I think the issues that have arisen in the last handful of years, from the pandemic, from social justice issues, from DEI issues. And what I reminded myself of is, after we had a stretch of a few pretty rough board meetings and a few experiences where I got stuff thrown at me in the store, and just all of the stories that you hear, I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. And then I remembered that if you would have asked me 10 years ago, would I be willing to sit in the seat and have the opportunity to lead, my answer would have been a resounding yes. And I reminded myself that I get to be in this position, I get to try to influence change, and I get the opportunity to try to create a better community that better serves our kids. And does that mean that we have to have some really tough conversations? Absolutely. Does that mean that I start entering into conversations that I know are not going to influence the change that I think my kids deserve in my community right now? Absolutely. But I'm planting those seeds. I think as leaders, what our job is to do is to take big swings and to take big chances and to ask the right questions on behalf of kids. And does that mean that our jobs are comfortable? No. In fact, it means that I think we need to make ourselves uncomfortable and to lean into those conversations to protect the kids that we're serving, as my colleagues have said down there. So I would not say that the last 2 years have made the job easy, but I will say that in the last 2 and 3 years may have made the job more rewarding, because we're doing the right work on behalf of kids that if we weren't doing, I'm not sure who would be doing it right now.
So I'm going to go down a couple of different roads with this answer. The first of which, anyone who laments about schools having a political nature just doesn't understand the history of public education in this country. Schools have always been political. As superintendents, we know that politics plays a role in schools. It has since the inception of public education. So we can either lament about that, or we can understand and lean into that truth. The difference is, it is political, but it shouldn't be partisan. And I think that that is a little bit of what we have seen turn the rancor, is that we've gone away from saying we can all discuss big ideas about education, have different ideas about how we allocate resources. Those are political discussions, but they should not be partisan. It also gave us a true test of, do we mean what our vision statements and our strategic commitments say? So when we say every student prepared for lifelong success, that we truly believe in equity, a misused word throughout this country, and we look at it as simply making sure that every student has a genuine opportunity to pursue whatever their version of the American dream is, and that's for every student. Just as Kevin said, not some students, not those students on Tuesdays and these students on Thursdays, every student every day. And it gave us a real chance to say, do we mean what we say? And we had to have some very difficult conversations with the community as a result of that. I'd say on the back side of it, I think how we communicated and what it showed about the importance of public schools as the center of our communities was never more evident than the last 2 years. I argue we were probably the most effective unit of government, and I can provide details if you would like. But when we go to it, when I would write messages to our community, I often would put a paragraph in saying something along the lines of this, that this will end, right? Just like Trent said, a pandemic ends, and when this ends, we are going to take account of how we treated one another. And when we take that account, what do you want our community story to be? Do you want it to be like places that behaved really inappropriately? Or do we want to be those models for students that we can disagree? We can have different perspectives on how something should be addressed. But we did it in a way that was respectful. It can be vigorous. We like vigorous debate, right? But it's going to be respectful, and we are going to come together. And in Northfield, we had a hard time like anybody else, but I am proud that our community, at the end, I think we can look back and be proud of what we did. Even when we disagreed, we did so in a way that was thoughtful, and yet we did leave it open so that we could heal. And I think that's the last part, Caitlynn, I would say about this, is that I think the unique role that public schools play right now in our communities is one of healer in chief. We bring people together. We are conveners. And we have the opportunity as we come out of this. We're not out of it. We're not going to be out of it for a few years. The lingering effects are going to join us. But we can either say we're going to go back to business as usual, which we want to be regular, right? We want to be back to regular a little bit. But we can also use that convening power that we have to create healing in these very divisive issues that can help us move forward toward a more perfect union. So I think we need to lean into that unique role that public schools have, because people, despite a lot of things, they do trust us. They trust their teachers. They trust their school. So we've had some of that has been damaged, but we have an opportunity to come out of this better maybe than we were to start. And I choose to lean into that part.
Okay,
Thanks
guys.
for not making us do 2 sentences on that one.
That's what I should have done. I know how much fun we're having, but I suspect that this will probably be our last question, so it better be a great answer. No.
They've all been great answers.
As we start to come out of the pandemic, as we're not out of it, as you say, though, there are some calls from folks to reinvent public education. So I'm curious, from all you smart people up here, what is one area in education that is ripe for change, and how would you like to see that change? PJ, I think you're up.
All right. Happy to go first on this one. I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it should have taught us that geography need not limit access to high-quality education and high-quality courses. And so I think this takes place in a handful of different ways. I think in urban education we see this quite a bit in terms of the potential quality of what some of our kids are receiving is not up to the standard that some other kids receive. But in rural, this is a massive issue too. So I know that in rural Illinois, the access to courses that we have, and we've put dedicated effort for a decade now, pales in comparison to the access that I had as a suburban teenager 25 years ago. And I just think that if we've learned anything, that geography doesn't have to limit access. And if anyone is comfortable with zip code determining quality of education for a kid, then I'm happy to debate them about that. I just don't think that we can sit by. I think there's an ethical and moral imperative to act on that, especially with the lesson learned that it doesn't have to be that way.
I think building off that idea, how can we build and sustain a system that customizes our services to the needs of every student? We started this with how do we reach every student? And every student needs something a little bit different. So how in our current system are we able to continue to evolve to a point where we are able to provide those kinds of customized services just in time, right, for what each student needs, while still maintaining a system that helps socialize our students and help them understand who each other are and where they come from. So how can we still have that group component, right, about making sure that kids from different backgrounds have a chance to meet and know each other and move forward together while still meeting their unique needs within the budgets that we currently have today.
I think the pandemic reminded us of the need to return to an individualized approach. So very similar to what my colleagues have had to say. This is this constant idea of asking ourselves, what would we want for our own children? It would be an individualized answer for our own children if we thought about that. It wouldn't be the general answer where systems that are built on a more industrialized approach, a mass education of a large group of people. We realized in the pandemic, as it impacted different families and different kids in many different ways and different populations of students. And in fact, it only drove a wedge to further widen the gap between groups of children and families from different parts of our community, different parts of our country, that we needed to be much more individualized and think about the access that every child has to resources, every child has to rigorous coursework, every child has to flexibility, technology, and really revisiting those strategies, those policies to make sure that we're answering that question every single day. What would we want for our own children? And how would we provide that to our own children? How do we individualize the approach, break down the barrier for every child? It was really, I just think, a reminder of something that maybe we knew, but we had to get back to based on those circumstances. And hopefully we're carrying that learning forward as we develop programs that really are customized for every individual child and family. We owe them that. We don't owe them one size fits all. We owe them what they need in that moment for that time.
You know, when you and I were talking prior to coming here, I learned something about you, that you and my daughter are exactly the same age. And I remember when the four of us, we were having conversation with you, you were outside of your apartment. And I have two daughters, and one of them really, Dad, I really want to work for 2 hours and then go home and work out at the gym and then go back to work. So in education, we always say that we're tied to the model of instruction that we provide, while at the same time we're saying that there's a shortage of workers. So for me, the task is, how do we continue the work that we do and not put ourselves out of business because we're set on the way we've always done it is the way it has to continue to be done. Because the next generation workforce, they've made their minds up. And so whether it's K-12 education, whether it is the corporate world, they've decided that their values aren't the same as ours. And so if we keep our heads in the sand, then private schools and charter schools, that 92% workforce that we've created that's made America great, is going to continue to decrease. So what keeps me up is, what can we do differently to support our parents and to make sure that we remain America's #1 producer of workforce, and to make sure that there is a steady supply of quality workers that are willing to partner with us. And so that's what I keep trying to figure out. And each year, we'll add a weekend. In October, there'll be a week vacation. And in November, there'll be a week. And then you get Christmas. And so we're just trying to figure out, how can we partner with the current workforce and prepare our business to be successful in the future as well. Because we don't want to become distinct. Because what we do is important to our country and to those students who are like me, who grew up poor and was depending on quality instructional teachers to assist me so that I can celebrate where I am today. We owe that to all of our citizens. And it's our job as CEOs to fight, to be innovative, to find solutions for those problems that we know we can afford and sustain long term.
All right, guys, thank you. Can we give them a round of applause, please? All right, thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure.
Caitlynn, if you
Dan.
don't mind, I think we have a little bit more time. I'd like to ask them a question.
Go for it.
So this year, AASA has made a theme of, and that's what the conference theme is going to be, of in order to lead well, you have to live well. You've seen the stress that superintendents have been over this past year. You described it. What has each of you done to live well so you could lead well?
So I stick to a pretty rigid routine in terms of what I do to try to keep myself healthy. And if I'm healthy, then that my day tends to go well. So if I get up, and those of you that are on the Peloton, you can get up and see me at 4:30 in the morning on the Peloton. I'll challenge any of you. I'm pretty good at it at this point. But if I'm not on that, my day is wrecked. And so to the point of live well, lead well, if I don't take care of me, it's really hard to take care of everyone else that I need to throughout the day. So outside of investing in my body that way, the thing that fills me up the most is investing in my family. And so figuring out what that time is. We shared lots of stories about our family at dinner yesterday, as it was great to get to know everyone. And I think we all share a lot of times, or current or past, sitting in bleachers and watching our kids. And so as much as I might complain about it, that's another thing I get to do. I get to go sit in bleachers and watch my kids, and that fills me up as well.
So much like PJ, I have a rigorous morning routine that involves both, physical exercise and just some strategies for my own emotional health that I do every day. Another piece that's been instrumental in me leading well is the daily walk that my wife and I take almost every afternoon. It's about 1.75 miles, and that's a great time for me to shut everything else off and us just to be able to focus on each other. I'm also brought back to reality on that walk quite a bit, which is a good thing for me. And then I think the other thing from a professional nature is making sure that we take care of our colleagues. So in Minnesota, every day the School Boards Association publishes a list of the articles that have appeared in papers across the state. And I try to look at those articles, and I try to pick a couple of my colleagues a few times a week where I send them a quick text saying, hey, saw the great success on that, wonderful, that's awesome. Or if someone has had a difficult thing with an issue that they've had in their school, just to reach out and say, hey, I'm thinking of you, I'm here for you. So for me, it's both that personal piece and professional of how are we reaching out to support each other, because if we don't support each other, no one else is going to.
I feel as though now that Matt shared that, I would be taking a 1.75 mile walk every afternoon with my wife, who's here today. So
Good decision.
And be brought back to reality. I would say very similar to my colleagues. I think that routine is important. I think exercise is important, and being centered with my family is important, and spending that time together. We really focus a lot on that. Our 3 children and my wife and I have, I think, just a wonderful relationship, as I'm sure many of our families do. And that centers me, that brings me back, that keeps me healthy, focused on making good decisions in that lens as well. But it just really is, I think, what for me gives me joy. And I think similar to how Matt expressed it, spreading joy in our work and thinking about joy in the superintendency and being intentional in that. I had the opportunity to speak to our state group last year at our conference about the joy of leadership and being intentional in reaching out to colleagues. That gives much more to me than I think the gesture does even to that person. Sticking to routines in our district too, spending time in classrooms. I'm in all of our buildings every week, and spending time with children, spending time with teachers, spending time with administrators gives me a tremendous amount of joy and really keeps right in front of me the work that we're doing. And I think that helps me stay balanced and stay healthy, both in the decision making, but physically, mentally, emotionally as well.
That one is a challenge for me. I'm a workaholic. I am married to a workaholic.
So no walks.
And so, and so it's amazing where I grew up. You were taught you work. And so now we're in this new mental space. And the new mental space says you've got to take time and invest in your mental health. And so I'm just, eating an elephant a bite at a time. And so I'm starting with things very simple, like, okay, when you're on vacation, if you're on a Christmas break, don't call anybody. Don't look at your email. you know. And so it's hard, and my wife will say, put the phone down. So for me, it's trying very hard. I'm trying very hard to, when I leave work and I know things are done, to completely disconnect. If I'm with my family, to completely disconnect. And so that's my goal. My goal is, what I need is a mental break. And so if I can improve my mental breaks and not thinking about school or thinking about the bus drivers or thinking about something that someone put on Facebook and begin going through the analytical process, what did we do right, what did we do wrong, how could we have done it differently? If I can give myself a mental, because, you know, I don't have bad, I'm vegetarian. So for me, if I can give myself mental space, that's my goal. Because I'm a committed family guy. And so when I'm with my family, they say I'm not, but I believe. I believe that I'm all in. But it's important for me to improve in that, because I set the tone for the district. So if I overcommit, that's going to force everyone in the district to overcommit, and then we're all going to be stressed together. So I recognize, I agree with that goal, own it, and you know, I don't like to lose, so my goal is to win there.
Well, PJ, Matt, Kevin, Trent, Caitlynn, let's give them all a big round.
This one
Blue ribbon panel, lots of luck.
Get a picture. We have
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Let's ask.